Before we drift into the quiet halls of history, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know if you enjoy these gentle journeys through time. Now, close your eyes, and let the night wrap around you like a velvet cloak. Imagine the soft glow of lanterns in a palace far away, where history whispers through corridors and gardens. Tonight, we will walk gently through the life of an emperor, not the wars, nor the power, but the quiet moments that shaped him, the small choices, the fleeting emotions, each step slow, each breath calm, as if the world itself is leaning back to sleep. Breathe in. Breathe out. And let the story unfold. In the quiet halls of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, young Hirohito wandered through corridors lined with silk screens and ink-painted landscapes. The early morning sunlight filtered softly through paper windows, casting gentle patterns on the polished wooden floors. He was just a boy of 7, yet the weight of 1,000 years of emperors pressed upon him with every careful step. His mind often drifted as he walked, the stories of his ancestors, the rituals that dictated the rhythm of the palace, the invisible lines that separated duty from desire. Outside, the garden stirred with the whisper of leaves and the slow, deliberate movements of koi in the pond. Inside, the palace was still, yet full of expectation. Hirohito's father, Emperor Taisho, had been ill for years, leaving the boy to absorb lessons in protocol, diplomacy, and history far beyond his age. Tutors filled his hours with knowledge of courtly etiquette and classical literature, but sometimes Hirohito longed for the laughter of children his age, the freedom to run through open fields instead of ceremonial gardens. In the evenings, after the day's lessons, he would sit by a window overlooking the palace grounds, tracing patterns in the frost on the glass. The moonlight, pale and silent, seemed to listen to his questions, the ones he could not voice to anyone else. What does it mean to lead? To be more than a figurehead? Can a boy carry the weight of a nation? This was the beginning of his journey, a life destined to straddle tradition and change, isolation and responsibility, expectation and longing. Even in his youth, Hirohito felt the pulse of history under his small, careful hands. And somewhere deep within, he sensed the quiet turbulence of a world moving toward unimaginable upheaval, a world he would one day have to navigate with both courage and caution. The morning mist clung to the palace gardens like a fragile veil, softening the shapes of stone lanterns and cherry trees. Hirohito walked along the winding paths, his small hands brushing against the cold, damp leaves. The koi pond mirrored the sky above, fragmented by ripples from a gentle breeze, and he watched the fish dart silently, their movements deliberate and graceful. Even in the quiet, shadows lingered. Court officials whispered in the corridors, their voices careful but weighted with unseen tension. Hirohito could sense the subtle currents of influence and expectation swirling around him. He was young, yet already learned to observe, to understand without words, to measure the pauses in conversation for the truths that were never spoken aloud. He thought of his father, lying in distant chambers, frail yet commanding respect, a living symbol of the lineage Hirohito was expected to uphold. The boy felt both admiration and unease. The rules of the palace were intricate and unyielding. One misstep could ripple through generations, a reminder that his life was not solely his own. In the afternoons, he found solace near the ancient ginkgo tree, its golden leaves falling slowly to the ground. Here, Hirohito allowed his thoughts to wander, imagining the lives of ordinary children far beyond the palace walls, children who ran freely, laughed without restraint, and slept without the constant hum of duty pressing upon them. Yet even in these moments of quiet longing, there was a spark of understanding. The life of an emperor was not chosen, but inherited. And with inheritance came responsibility, a sense of purpose that both frightened and fascinated him. The shadows in the garden mirrored the shadows in his own heart, and he wondered what it meant to grow into a role defined by history, ceremony, and the unseen eyes of the nation. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with pale pink and gold, Hirohito returned to the palace corridors, carrying with him the delicate tension of childhood and destiny intertwined, a prelude to the years of challenge, reflection, and silent contemplation that lay ahead. Evenings in the palace were hushed, the corridors illuminated only by lanterns casting gentle pools of light. Hirohito wandered past sliding shoji screens, their paper panels thin enough to carry the soft murmur of voices from neighboring chambers. The words were fragmented, cautious, but the meaning seeped through. The court was alive with intrigue, even in his youth. He paused near one screen, peering discreetly. Ministers and nobles leaned close, their expressions serious yet measured, their words a delicate dance of diplomacy and hidden motives. Hirohito, though only a child, felt the weight of every glance and every carefully chosen phrase. He was learning the art of observation, of reading not what was said, but what was left unsaid. The young prince's mind drifted to questions he dared not voice. Why were some lives ruled by ceremony, while others seemed free to choose? Could he ever walk among the people without the walls of expectation pressing down upon him? The palace, with its elegant corridors and perfumed air, felt both protective and confining, a gilded cage that shimmered with beauty yet carried invisible chains. At night, in the solitude of his private chamber, Hirohito traced the patterns of moonlight across the tatami mats. Shadows danced and merged, echoing the secrets he had glimpsed that day. He imagined himself moving silently through the palace, unseen yet aware of everything, an emperor in waiting learning the subtleties of power before he could even wield it. A single candle flickered in the corner, its flame fragile against the darkness. Hirohito understood that patience, perception, and discretion were as vital as courage or strength. And as sleep began to beckon, he felt the pull of dreams where duty and desire intertwined, where the path ahead was as uncertain as the shifting shadows behind the screens. The following morning, the palace awoke with quiet ritual. Courtiers moved in practiced harmony, the soft rustle of silk robes and the distant tolling of temple bells composing a gentle symphony of order. Hirohito sat cross-legged on his tatami mat, his small hands folded, eyes fixed on his tutor. The lessons were not in numbers or letters alone, but in patience, in the unspoken rules that governed every gesture. Observe first, speak only when necessary, the tutor intoned, voice steady like the wind through the cherry trees. Each word seemed simple, yet Hirohito felt the weight of their meaning pressing upon him. In every glance from the court, in every subtle bow, there was a world of nuance. As he listened, he became acutely aware of how easily one could misstep. A careless word, a glance too long, could shift favor or seed suspicion. Yet within these quiet teachings, he also found a strange beauty, a rhythm to the palace life, a delicate choreography where even silence carried meaning. Later, he wandered to the inner gardens, where autumn leaves drifted lazily to the pond below. Reflections of gold and crimson danced upon the water, merging with the soft ripples of his own thoughts. Here, away from the eyes of ministers and tutors, Hirohito allowed his mind to wander, imagining the lives beyond the palace gates. The people he would one day guide, the world he would eventually shape, these were mysteries he could only glimpse through imagination and dream. Even as the day's lessons ended, the palace retained its hushed pulse. Shadows lengthened across the wooden verandas, whispering secrets of the past. Hirohito understood, more than ever, that the greatest power lay not in command alone, but in understanding, patience, and the quiet courage to act with wisdom when the time was right. As night fell, he lay beneath the lattice of his window, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, a soft lullaby of anticipation and possibility. Dreams awaited, where the line between duty and desire blurred, carrying him forward along the uncharted path of his own destiny. The morning light spilled gently into the courtyard, painting the stone pathways in soft hues of amber. Hirohito walked barefoot, feeling the coolness of the stones beneath him, each step measured, deliberate. The palace was stirring, but here, in the quiet courtyard, there was room to breathe, to listen, not just to words, but to the subtle currents of the world around him. A soft murmur reached his ears, the courtiers moving unseen through the corridors, their whispered conversations like threads weaving a hidden tapestry. Though the words were indistinct, Hirohito sensed the undercurrents of ambition, of loyalty tested and alliances shifting. At times, the smallest smile or nod could speak louder than proclamations from the throne. He paused near the koi pond, watching the fish glide gracefully beneath the water, their movements fluid, hypnotic. In them, he saw a reflection of life at court, calm on the surface, yet currents moving beneath, invisible but undeniable. A subtle unease settled in him. The palace, he realized, was not merely a place of learning or ceremony, it was a labyrinth, each turn carrying potential for both wonder and danger. A sudden gust of wind stirred the maple leaves, scattering them across the stone. Hirohito followed the pattern of their descent, tracing invisible paths, and thought about the choices he would one day have to make. Each decision, no matter how small, could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the walls of the palace. By evening, the courtyard emptied, leaving only shadows and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. Hirohito remained, seated on the edge of the pond, hands resting lightly on his knees. The quiet spoke to him now more clearly than any lesson, patience, observation, understanding. He began to sense the subtle pulse of the palace, the rhythm that would one day guide him as emperor. As night draped itself across the sky, lanterns flickered gently, casting warm halos on the walls. Hirohito lay down beneath the stars, letting the hush of the courtyard seep into his mind. The palace whispered its secrets in hushed tones, a lullaby of history and destiny, and for the first time, he felt both the weight of his future and the quiet thrill of the journey yet to come. Night had settled deep into the palace, draping every corridor in a silken darkness. Hirohito's footsteps were soft against the polished wooden floors, careful not to disturb the quiet hum of the sleeping palace. Yet the stillness felt alive, as if the shadows themselves were watching, whispering secrets he was not yet meant to hear. He wandered through hallways lined with sliding screens, their painted landscapes fading into shadow. Each panel seemed to hold a memory, a story captured in brushstrokes, cherry blossoms drifting over serene rivers, mountains cloaked in mist. Hirohito paused, tracing the painted lines with his gaze. He imagined the hands that created them, the lives of those who once walked these halls. The past pressed gently against him, reminding him that he was not alone in his journey, even if he often felt isolated. A faint noise, a creak, a breath, made him freeze. From behind a screen, he glimpsed a figure, swift and silent, disappearing as if swallowed by the darkness. Curiosity pricked at him, mingling with a cautious fear. The palace was more than a home, it was a web of secrets, and Hirohito was only beginning to notice the threads. He continued deeper into the hallways, guided by a mixture of intuition and fascination. In one small chamber, moonlight poured through a narrow window, illuminating a lone calligraphy brush resting beside an open scroll. The ink still glistened, as though someone had paused mid-thought. Hirohito knelt, letting his fingers hover above the paper, feeling the weight of words unspoken. The brush was a bridge to the minds of others, a quiet testament to thought, ambition, and hidden desires. Hours passed in the hush of the night, yet time seemed suspended. Each footstep, each whispered echo, pulled him further into the palace's intricate dance of power and mystery. By the time he returned to his chambers, the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky, soft pinks fading into pale gold. Hirohito lay upon his futon, mind alive with the shadows he had glimpsed, realizing that the palace was not merely a backdrop to his life, it was a character in itself, shaping him, challenging him, preparing him for the weight of what was to come. The morning light filtered through the shoji screens, casting long, gentle shadows across Hirohito's chamber. He woke with a quiet awareness that the palace itself had changed overnight, or perhaps he had. The silence he had wandered through in the darkness now seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the walls themselves had heard and remembered. Servants moved with precise, rehearsed steps, their faces calm, but their eyes carried hints of murmured conversations. The courtiers were gathering, preparing for the day's rituals, and with them came the subtle currents of politics Hirohito was only beginning to sense. He watched from behind a folding screen, noticing how bows were measured, words carefully chosen, and glances exchanged with delicate intent. Every movement, every pause, seemed loaded with meaning. A chamberlain approached, bowing low. "Your Highness," he said softly, "the ministers await in the council room. There are matters to discuss." Hirohito nodded, trying to appear composed, though inside a storm of curiosity and unease swirled. The council room smelled of tatami, ink, and faint traces of incense, an olfactory reminder that tradition and power were inseparable here. As Hirohito entered, the courtiers' eyes flicked toward him, measuring him, weighing him. Some carried respect, others a quiet skepticism. He could feel the tension, subtle but persistent, like a current beneath still water. Discussions began with careful formality, policies, trade, rituals, but soon hints of rivalries emerged. Words that seemed benign at first revealed layered meanings, gestures conveyed intentions unspoken. Hirohito listened, absorbing more than he spoke. Each voice, each glance, became a thread in a complex tapestry of influence and control. He realized that growing into the role expected of him would demand not only knowledge but intuition, patience, and the ability to read between the lines. By the day's end, Hirohito returned to the quiet of his personal chamber, the weight of observation pressing gently upon him. He traced the patterns of the tatami with his fingers, feeling the world of whispers and politics settle into a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the palace floor. Outside, the wind stirred the garden's trees, leaves brushing against each other in hushed conversation, as if nature itself mirrored the delicate intrigues inside the palace walls. Hirohito closed his eyes, letting the soft light and gentle rustle of leaves lull him into thought. The palace was no longer just a home, it was a living lesson in patience, awareness, and the subtle art of influence, a world he would need to master in time. The early morning mist lingered over the palace gardens, softening the edges of stone lanterns and koi ponds. Hirohito walked slowly along the winding path, his kimono brushing against the dew-kissed grass. The air was cool, almost fragile, carrying whispers of the trees and distant murmurs of the courtiers beginning their day. Despite the calm, Hirohito felt a tension coiled within him, a sense of expectation pressing from all directions. Every footstep he took seemed to echo with the voices of ancestors, their expectations carved into the very halls of the palace. He remembered the stern gaze of his father and the careful nods of ministers. They looked at him as if measuring his readiness for a role he scarcely understood. A young page approached with a folded scroll. Hirohito took it delicately, noting the precise calligraphy. It contained matters of trade, ceremonial appointments, and subtle instructions for observing court etiquette. Even mundane orders carried weight here, and he felt the invisible chains of duty tighten with each line he read. He paused by the koi pond, watching the fish glide beneath the water's surface, smooth and deliberate. They seemed free in a way the palace never allowed him to be. Yet, even in this serene reflection, he sensed the whisper of responsibility, reminding him that freedom was always tempered by duty. Hirohito's thoughts drifted to the palace corridors he had walked the night before, alive with hushed plotting and unspoken ambitions. The same courtiers who bowed respectfully now held secrets and agendas. Each conversation he overheard, each subtle glance, became part of a hidden lesson in power. He realized that his every word, every gesture, would be scrutinized, an unseen audience waiting to test his composure. By afternoon, he found himself in the private library, a sanctuary of quiet and shadow. Scrolls of history, philosophy, and poetry lay before him. He traced the inked characters with his fingers, feeling the weight of centuries. In these pages, he glimpsed the lives of emperors who had walked similar paths, their triumphs and failures echoing across time. He began to understand that the crown was not merely an ornament, it was a mantle of responsibility that required wisdom beyond his years. As evening settled over the palace, Hirohito returned to his chambers, the fading light painting the walls with soft hues. Alone, he allowed himself a rare sigh, the tension of the day giving way to quiet contemplation. The weight of expectation pressed still, but he sensed a new resolve forming within him. The world of duty, politics, and tradition was vast, but he was learning, slowly, to navigate its currents with care and insight. The night deepened, and Hirohito lay down, the soft rustle of the garden outside lulling him. Dreams awaited him, but so did the quiet preparation for the challenges of the coming days, a journey of awareness, patience, and subtle mastery that had only just begun. The dawn light filtered through the shoji screens, casting delicate patterns on the polished wooden floors of the palace. Hirohito rose slowly, feeling the lingering weight of yesterday's lessons press gently upon him. Yet, today, a new undercurrent stirred within the walls, a subtle tension that seemed to hum in the air. As he moved through the corridors, soft footsteps echoed behind him. Servants bowed and courtiers greeted him with practiced smiles, but Hirohito sensed something unspoken threading through the pleasantries. Whispers reached him like a faint wind slipping through paper doors, voices that hinted at schemes and secret alliances. He could not yet see them clearly, but he felt their presence, a reminder that the palace was never truly quiet. In the audience hall, ministers assembled for the morning council. Hirohito observed from his throne, silent and composed. Their discussions were polite on the surface, yet beneath the words lay subtle contests of influence. A minister's glance lingered too long, another's tone carried an unspoken challenge. Hirohito's heart thumped softly, not with fear, but with the growing realization that leadership required perception as much as authority. During a brief respite in the garden, Hirohito wandered among the blooming cherry trees. Petals drifted through the air, catching the sunlight and painting the ground with soft pink shadows. He let his thoughts wander, tracing each whisper he had heard, considering its possible meaning. Each whisper, he realized, could be a clue, a warning, or a test. The palace was a living story, and he was learning to read its subtle language. A sudden knock at his chamber door startled him. A young attendant presented a folded note, its paper crisp and scented faintly with incense. Hirohito opened it carefully. The message was brief, almost cryptic, a reminder of a meeting later that day, but with a tone that suggested more than mere ceremony. Someone was watching, guiding, or perhaps manipulating the threads of court life. The thought prickled his mind with a mixture of intrigue and caution. As twilight descended, Hirohito found himself alone once more, seated beside the koi pond. The fish moved lazily beneath the water, unbothered by the shifting currents above. He envied their simplicity, yet he knew that he, too, must navigate the subtle eddies of expectation, loyalty, and ambition. Each day brought new lessons, and each whispered word carried weight. The night arrived quietly, but the palace seemed alive with secret energy. Hirohito lay on his futon, listening to the soft rustle of silk and the distant footsteps in the hallways. Dreams would come, carrying visions of the challenges ahead, yet even in sleep, he felt the pulse of the court's hidden intentions. Slowly, he understood that the true mastery of his role would require patience, attentiveness, and the courage to act when the moment demanded. Morning arrived with a delicate haze, softening the edges of the palace gardens. Hirohito walked slowly among the flowering plum trees, the air heavy with the scent of blossoms and the faint smoke of incense. The whispers from the corridors yesterday lingered still in his mind, weaving a quiet tension beneath the calm surface of the palace. The council convened in the grand hall. Today, the minister's words carried sharper edges, though spoken with careful politeness. One minister, his tone unusually warm, suggested a new administrative reform. Another, ostensibly supportive, allowed a subtle insinuation to slip, a question of loyalty, veiled as concern for the emperor's well-being. Hirohito listened, his expression serene, yet every glance, every pause, was carefully noted. Later, in the private study, Hirohito pondered the delicate balance of power. The palace was a labyrinth, not of stone, but of human intentions. Courtiers smiled while their eyes measured him, each gesture a brushstroke in an invisible painting of ambition. Hirohito felt the weight of centuries of tradition and expectation pressing gently on his shoulders, urging both caution and decisiveness. By afternoon, a secret meeting was arranged. A trusted advisor approached him quietly in the corridor, motioning him into a shadowed room. Here, away from the eyes of the court, truths that were unspeakable in public could be voiced. The advisor spoke of alliances forming in secret, of ambitions that could threaten not only Hirohito's authority but the delicate peace of the palace. Each revelation was a ripple in still water, altering the currents that would guide the emperor's next moves. As dusk approached, Hirohito wandered onto the veranda overlooking the koi pond. The water mirrored the fading sky, its surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple of a fish or falling petal. He considered the day's subtle confrontations, the hidden glances, and the whispered words. Leadership, he realized, was less about commanding attention than discerning the quiet undercurrents. The palace, with all its grandeur, was alive with intrigue, and he was learning to navigate its labyrinth with measured steps. The evening brought a soft, cool breeze. Candles flickered along the corridors, casting shadows that danced like silent courtiers. Hirohito retreated to his futon, letting the day's observations settle into memory. Dreams would soon come, carrying visions of alliances and betrayals, of loyalty tested and ambitions revealed. Each night, the palace whispered anew, and each night, Hirohito grew more attuned to its subtle voice. In the quiet of the night, he understood a truth that would guide him. The court was not merely a place of ceremony, but a stage where patience, perception, and the courage to act at the right moment determined the fate of all within its walls. The morning light seeped softly through the shoji screens, painting delicate patterns on the polished wooden floor. Hirohito rose with a sense of quiet anticipation, for today, the palace felt different, charged with the subtle tension of hidden eyes and unheard words. A summons arrived from one of the palace's senior ministers, delivered with measured reverence. Hirohito knew this was no ordinary message. The advisor's tone hinted at a matter delicate and urgent. Entering the council chamber, he found the ministers seated, their postures formal, yet their eyes flickered with restrained emotion. The senior minister, bowing low, presented a situation of potential treachery. A distant provincial lord, it seemed, had begun to gather support quietly, testing loyalties and whispering doubts about the emperor's decisions. The court awaited Hirohito's response, watching not only the matter at hand but also his subtle reactions. Every nod, every pause, every expression would be measured. Hirohito, maintaining his serene exterior, asked measured questions, revealing neither alarm nor impatience. His mind sifted through the details, weighing the loyalty of those around him, considering the timing and subtlety required for a proper response. Trust was fragile, and loyalty, once questioned, was difficult to restore. Later, in the quiet of the Imperial Gardens, Hirohito met with his closest advisor. The advisor spoke softly, outlining possible courses of action: confrontation, careful observation, or the delicate placement of counter-influence. Each choice carried its own risk, each word spoken a potential ripple in the web of alliances that held the court together. As the day waned, Hirohito wandered through the palace corridors, noting gestures and glances that others assumed went unnoticed. Servants, courtiers, even the gardeners, all played their part in the living tapestry of palace life. In each subtle interaction, Hirohito discerned the unspoken truths: who held ambition in their heart, who acted from fear, and who would remain steadfast when tested. Night fell gently, with lanterns casting long, quivering shadows. Hirohito sat by the koi pond, the water reflecting the faint glow of the moon. The world seemed suspended, poised between serenity and the tensions of human ambition. He understood that the true test of leadership was not merely responding to crises, but perceiving the silent currents before they reached a breaking point. As he lay down to rest, the palace whispered again in its quiet language. Dreams would soon carry visions of loyalty and betrayal, of subtle maneuvers and hidden intentions. Hirohito felt the weight of these lessons settle upon him, knowing that the path ahead demanded patience, perception, and the courage to act when the moment was right. The palace was quiet in the early hours, yet shadows moved like whispers across the polished floors. Hirohito's mind had not rested. The morning's discussions with his advisors lingered, threading through his thoughts like fine silk. Loyalty and ambition, so often hidden, now pressed close to the surface. In the council chamber, a message arrived from the provincial lord's envoy. Hirohito studied the calligraphy carefully. It was respectful, almost deferential, yet the subtext suggested defiance. The letter did not openly challenge his authority, but the careful phrasing hinted at a growing confidence, a subtle testing of boundaries. The emperor called a private meeting with his inner circle. Each advisor entered with a practiced bow, yet Hirohito sensed unease in their steps, a hesitation that spoke louder than words. Whispers of possible conspiracies had begun to circulate, some born of genuine concern, others of envy and fear. Hirohito listened, spoke sparingly, and observed keenly, knowing that overreaction could turn suspicion into rebellion. Later, wandering the palace corridors in solitude, Hirohito noticed how even the smallest gestures of servants carried meaning. A lingering glance here, a deliberately misplaced document there, nothing escaped his careful attention. The palace was alive with subtle signals, each one a thread in a vast tapestry of power. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first signs of tension became visible. Courtiers whispered behind delicate screens, messages were exchanged in hushed tones, and a sense of anticipation hung in the air like the fragrance of blooming night flowers. Hirohito's inner calm contrasted with the mounting currents of uncertainty outside his private chambers. That night, in the dim glow of lantern light, Hirohito stood on the veranda, gazing at the distant mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. The serenity of the landscape was deceptive. Just as the tranquil water could conceal dangerous currents, the palace held secrets beneath its elegant surface. He understood that a subtle ripple, once stirred, could cascade into waves of conflict. Hirohito retreated to his chambers, the events of the day folding into his consciousness like layers of a dream. Shadows moved silently, both within the palace and within his thoughts. The test of loyalty had begun, and every quiet choice, every measured word, would shape the unfolding story of power and trust. The night settled over the palace like a velvet curtain, muffling footsteps and soft murmurs. Yet even in this quiet, Hirohito could sense the subtle movements of ambition and fear. The courtiers' whispers, carried behind carved wooden screens, formed a delicate web of speculation and doubt. An urgent knock interrupted his meditation. A young messenger entered, bowing low, his face pale. In his trembling hands was a note, written in hurried calligraphy. It spoke of secret meetings in hidden chambers, alliances forming quietly in the shadows, some out of loyalty, some out of desire for power. The letter wasn't signed, yet Hirohito sensed the hand of someone both clever and bold. He summoned his closest advisors, but even their confident expressions could not mask the tension beneath. Words were chosen carefully. One wrong phrase could betray the knowledge he had already gleaned. Hirohito spoke little, letting the advisors speak, listening to every hesitation, every slip, every flicker of emotion. Each clue, however small, added to the map of intrigue slowly unfolding in his mind. Later, as the moon cast silver light through the latticed windows, Hirohito wandered the palace gardens. Lanterns swayed gently, casting long shadows across the stone pathways. The scent of night-blooming flowers mixed with the distant sound of flowing water, creating an almost dreamlike serenity, yet beneath it lay the sharp edge of anticipation. A lone figure appeared at the far end of the garden, half hidden in shadow. Hirohito recognized the quiet grace of a trusted aide. The aide's eyes conveyed a mix of fear and determination. Without words, they exchanged a subtle gesture, an acknowledgement of the delicate balance between loyalty and danger. The emperor returned to his chambers, the letter clutched in his hand. He understood that the palace was a living organism, and every whispered conversation, every secret glance, could shift the currents of power. In the quiet of his study, Hirohito allowed himself a moment to breathe, knowing that tomorrow, the delicate dance of intrigue would continue, and that every decision, every observation, would inch him closer to the hidden truths that defined his reign. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the palace rooftops, painting the gardens in muted gold. The world seemed still, yet Hirohito knew that beneath this calm, currents of intrigue shifted with quiet urgency. In the courtyard, masked servants moved like ghosts, carrying baskets of flowers and trays of tea. Their movements were precise, rehearsed, yet Hirohito's sharp eyes caught a subtle hesitation in one of them, a hand lingering too long on a railing, a glance exchanged with someone unseen. He felt the pulse of secret alliances forming, hidden beneath layers of etiquette. A meeting was scheduled in the private study. Only a select few were invited, their loyalty unquestioned, or so he believed. Hirohito observed each arrival with quiet intensity. Courtiers bowed low, but their eyes flickered with unreadable emotion, curiosity, fear, perhaps even envy. Words were spoken, formal and measured, yet each phrase carried the weight of hidden meaning. Outside the study, a gentle wind rustled the cherry blossoms. Petals drifted down, landing silently on the stone pathways, a reminder of fleeting beauty and impermanence. Hirohito stepped into the courtyard for a moment of reflection. The air was cool, carrying whispers of distant conversations, secrets spoken and unheard. Suddenly, a shadow moved against the wall, a figure crouched, watching, waiting. Hirohito's pulse quickened, though he did not show it. He knew the palace was a stage, and each unseen player could alter the story in an instant. The figure vanished before anyone else noticed, leaving only a sense of unease lingering in the morning air. Returning to his chambers, Hirohito considered the delicate threads of loyalty and ambition, each one stretching thin under the weight of unspoken truths. The day ahead would demand careful observation and quiet decisiveness. Every glance, every whispered word, would shape the palace's hidden narrative, and he, as emperor, had to navigate the labyrinth with patience and subtlety. The late afternoon sun filtered through shoji screens, casting delicate patterns of light and shadow across Hirohito's private study. The air was thick with the scent of ink and polished wood, a calm veneer over the tension that had quietly grown in the palace. A messenger arrived, bowing deeply, holding a folded note sealed with a crest Hirohito knew all too well. The words inside were carefully chosen, hinting at alliances shifting in secret. Though polite in appearance, the note carried a subtle warning: loyalty in the court was rarely absolute. Hirohito's fingers lingered on the paper, feeling the weight of every hidden meaning. Later, in the garden, he walked along the stone path lined with lanterns. The cherry blossoms, now drifting lazily in the warm breeze, seemed almost to speak of the impermanence of power. As he walked, he remembered the smiles and bows of courtiers who, behind closed doors, whispered doubts and veiled critiques. The palace walls were not just stone, they were alive with secrets. A confidant approached, bowing low. Their conversation was careful, measured, yet Hirohito felt the subtle tension underlying every word. Each phrase was a test, each gesture a signal. In the slow rhythm of palace life, even a shared glance could alter futures. He listened, nodded, and smiled lightly, but his mind catalogued every nuance, every hidden emotion. Night began to fall, and the palace lamps flickered to life. Shadows stretched across corridors and gardens, reminding Hirohito that darkness was never merely the absence of light. It was the presence of uncertainty, waiting to be discovered. He retired to his chambers, thoughts heavy, yet his expression serene. The day had been a quiet battle of observation and subtle power, a reminder that the true weight of leadership lay not in commands shouted, but in the whispers carried on the wind. The moon rose pale and watchful over the palace rooftops, its silver light glinting on the curved eaves. Inside, Hirohito's mind was restless. Reports had reached him of subtle tensions between two influential clans, loyalties shifting like sand beneath the surface of court life. It was not an overt rebellion, but a quiet, insidious play of influence, promises whispered in corridors no one else walked. In the dimly lit audience hall, Hirohito observed the courtiers with careful attention. Each gesture, each bow, each hesitation revealed the currents swirling beneath the polished etiquette. He noted the way one daimyo's hand lingered over a document, or how another's gaze flickered toward an empty corner of the room. These were the threads of intrigue, delicate and dangerous. Later, in his private study, Hirohito pored over maps and letters, tracing alliances and plotting subtle responses. A faint smile touched his lips, not of amusement, but of understanding. Power in this palace was like a river. Even a small stone could divert its flow, yet the river always found its path. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of sliding doors. A trusted advisor entered, kneeling respectfully. "The clans stir, Your Majesty," the advisor said, voice low. "Their ambitions are growing. One misstep, even a whispered word, could ignite a storm." Hirohito nodded slowly, eyes following the moonlight across the polished floor. "We do not act with haste," he murmured. "We watch, we listen. And we wait." The night deepened, carrying with it a quiet tension. Outside, the garden seemed serene, yet the soft rustle of leaves hinted at secrets moving unseen. In the palace, silence was never empty, it was filled with the careful plotting of those who sought to shape the future. And Hirohito, poised at the center of it all, felt the first tremors of the challenges yet to come. The early dawn painted the palace walls with muted gold, spilling across the intricate carvings of dragons and phoenixes that watched silently over the halls. Hirohito moved through the corridors with deliberate calm, each step measured, echoing softly on polished wood. Despite the serenity of morning, tension lingered like fog, wrapping the palace in a quiet unease. Whispers had begun to drift along the silk-draped corridors. Courtiers spoke in low, cautious tones, their eyes darting toward empty corners as if even shadows might overhear. One particular whisper unsettled Hirohito, the talk of a clandestine meeting between two powerful clans, hidden behind layers of protocol, their intentions veiled in courtesy and false smiles. He paused outside the grand hall, listening. The sound of a folding fan snapping open, the shuffle of silk robes, the faint scent of incense, it all blended into a tapestry of subtle signals. Hirohito's eyes narrowed. Power in this palace was never declared, it was hinted at, suggested, played out like a slow and dangerous dance. Inside, courtiers arranged themselves with meticulous care. A daimyo, tall and severe, exchanged a fleeting glance with a minister known for his cunning. Every gesture, every hesitation, carried meaning, and Hirohito observed them all with patient scrutiny. He noted how one servant lingered near a column, perhaps to overhear, perhaps to report, he could not be sure. Later, in the solitude of his study, Hirohito let his thoughts wander through the labyrinth of alliances and ambitions. He traced the lines between clans, noting where loyalty might fracture, where ambition might erupt. The palace, for all its beauty, was a living organism, breathing in intrigue and exhaling strategy. Hirohito allowed himself a rare sigh, a momentary release of tension. Even the most intricate plans could be undone by a single word, a single misstep. Yet within him, there was also a flicker of curiosity, a spark that urged him to see how this intricate web would unravel, and what truths might emerge from the shadows. As twilight approached, the palace shifted again. Candles flickered to life, casting long, quivering shadows. The whispers had not ceased, if anything, they had grown bolder. Hirohito stood at the window, gazing at the moon rising like a silent guardian. He knew the coming nights would bring choices, alliances, and betrayals that would test not only the palace's power but the very strength of his mind. In that quiet, watchful moment, Hirohito felt the pulse of history stirring around him, each heartbeat a reminder that even in a world of opulence, the most delicate threads often held the greatest power. Night had draped the palace in a velvet cloak, muffling footsteps and softening edges. Hirohito walked slowly along the moonlit corridors, the air scented with jasmine and sandalwood, carrying both calm and quiet warning. Behind the folding screens, whispers persisted, deliberate, careful, yet unmistakable. A secret meeting had been arranged, and Hirohito knew that even the smallest slip could ripple into chaos. Through the paper panels, flickers of lantern light hinted at figures bending low in conversation, hands gesturing subtly, eyes meeting with unspoken understanding. Each motion was a code, a part of a larger puzzle that Hirohito needed to decipher. He paused, listening. A laugh, soft and controlled, floated through the air, followed by a careful cough. The sound seemed innocent, Yet Hirohito felt the weight behind it, an undercurrent of tension, ambition, and something darker, almost playful, but laced with threat. He realized that these nights, quiet and slow, held more truth than the sunlit hours, where politeness masked motives and power hid behind smiles. Moving silently, Hirohito observed the servants' careful choreography, one carrying tea, another adjusting curtains, every movement precise and deliberate, as if rehearsed for eyes unseen. In that choreography, he sensed the dance of loyalty and deception, a delicate balance between obedience and survival. Later, in his private chambers, Hirohito allowed himself a moment of reflection. He traced the alliances forming and dissolving like smoke in the candlelight. The palace was alive with secrets, each corridor a vein carrying hidden ambitions. And somewhere in those shadows, decisions were being made that would shape not just the night, but the days to come. The moonlight shifted across the lacquered floors, highlighting the patterns in the wood like ancient maps. Hirohito's gaze lingered on them, his mind tracing the intricate lines of strategy and caution. Tonight was but one chapter, yet it carried the weight of the story still unfolding, a story where whispers held the power to move mountains and break hearts alike. As he finally lay down to rest, the quiet hum of the palace surrounded him. Even in sleep, Hirohito felt the pulse of intrigue, the rhythm of plots yet unseen, and the delicate thrill of watching a web slowly tighten around those who dared to play the game. The following evening, the palace gardens glimmered under a scattering of lanterns. Their gentle light traced the curves of stone pathways and the edges of koi-filled ponds, casting reflections that danced like fleeting thoughts. Hirohito wandered among them, his footsteps careful, almost reverent, as if disturbing the silence would unravel the fragile balance of the night. A lone figure emerged from the shadows, a court advisor whose loyalty was never absolute. His eyes flickered with something unspoken, a mix of guilt and expectation. "Your Highness," he murmured, bowing deeply, "there are matters you must know, before they reach the wrong ears." Hirohito's gaze softened yet stayed piercing. The lanterns illuminated his face, revealing the quiet tension beneath his composed exterior. The advisor hesitated, choosing words that would tip the scales of trust and betrayal. Every pause was heavy, every glance a subtle probe into Hirohito's understanding. "The factions, they shift," the advisor continued, his voice almost lost to the rustling leaves. "And some whispers, of alliances, of plans, cannot remain hidden much longer. The palace is alive with intentions, and not all are yours to command." Hirohito nodded slowly, absorbing each syllable. The gardens, so serene in daylight, now held a charged atmosphere, an invisible web stretching between lanterns and shadows, where truths and lies intertwined. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing against him, the delicate burden of discerning sincerity from manipulation. As the advisor departed, leaving a trail of perfumed air, Hirohito lingered near the pond. The water reflected his image, fractured by the gentle ripple of koi, reminding him that perception itself could be deceptive. In those quiet moments, he realized that power was never given, it was claimed through patience, observation, and the careful reading of unspoken signals. Above him, the moon carved a pale path across the garden, illuminating the edges of secrets yet to unfold. Hirohito felt the pull of inevitability, the sense that choices made tonight would echo through corridors, through hearts, and through history. Sleep would bring no reprieve, the palace's pulse continued in every shadow, every flicker of light, whispering the story that was still being written. The next morning, the audience hall was bathed in soft, golden light, filtering through tall, latticed windows. Hirohito entered with measured steps, each echo across the polished floor a reminder of the countless eyes that might be watching. The hall, usually a place of ceremonial calm, now seemed alive with whispers and unspoken calculations. Advisors, nobles, and distant relatives assembled in the hall, their faces composed but their eyes betraying subtle currents of ambition. Hirohito could sense the undercurrents, the tension between loyalty and personal gain, the fragile alliances shifting with every cautious glance. A minor courtier approached with a folded scroll, bowing low. "Your Highness, intelligence from the northern provinces has arrived," he said, his voice tight with unease. Hirohito took the scroll, feeling the weight of information that might alter everything. The words within were measured, but the implications stretched far beyond the written lines. Dissent simmered, rivalries festered, and the once stable court balance teetered on the edge. Hirohito allowed a pause, letting his gaze sweep over the hall. The nobles remained poised, yet he sensed the subtle exchange of signals, gestures almost imperceptible, a flick of an eyebrow, the tilt of a head. He understood, in that quiet moment, that knowledge was not power alone, the interpretation, the timing, the perception of control, all intertwined to define authority. He stepped forward, his voice calm yet carrying an unmistakable command. "We shall meet the northern envoys personally," he said. "And listen, not just to their words, but to the silences between them." The hall exhaled, tension palpable yet contained, as Hirohito's presence became the center around which uncertainty rotated. As the court dispersed to prepare for the envoy's arrival, Hirohito lingered, fingers brushing the edge of a carved pillar. He felt the pull of anticipation, the quiet thrill of impending revelation. The palace walls, silent witnesses to centuries of history, seemed to hum with expectation. And in the spaces between the echoes of footsteps, Hirohito's mind traced possibilities, schemes, and the delicate steps he would need to walk to maintain control over a court alive with ambition and shadowed intent. The envoys arrived under a pale sky, where morning mist curled through the palace courtyards like unspoken secrets. Their horses' hooves echoed against the stone, the sound swallowed by the still air. Each envoy was cloaked in fine silk, yet their eyes held the guarded sharpness of men who had traveled not merely to report, but to negotiate their place in the empire's balance. Hirohito stood waiting beneath the carved eaves of the audience chamber. His robe was simple today, dark indigo with threads of silver that shimmered softly as he moved. There was a serenity to him, but beneath it, a current of measured vigilance. The court watched in reverent silence, sensing the quiet choreography of power unfolding before them. As the envoys bowed, Hirohito gestured for them to rise. "You have crossed distance and doubt," he said, voice low, steady. "Now speak of what grows in the north." The eldest envoy, his face marked by wind and worry, spoke of local unrest, farmers burdened by new taxes, whispers of forgotten loyalties revived. His tone carried restraint, but not fear. "Your Majesty," he said, eyes lifted to meet Hirohito's, "the North remains faithful. But faith withers where hunger grows." The words lingered like frost on glass. Around the chamber, nobles exchanged glances, some filled with unease, others calculation. Hirohito studied the envoy in silence, his gaze calm, yet searching deeper than words. Finally, he spoke. "Faith," he murmured, "is not unlike rice, it must be cultivated, watered, and guarded from rot." His statement drew a faint stir of movement among the courtiers, a ripple of understanding, or apprehension. As the audience ended, the envoys withdrew, leaving behind an echo of tension. Lady Aiko approached, her presence soft as the fall of silk. "They test your patience," she said quietly, "and perhaps your mercy." Hirohito looked past her, through the open doors toward the misty garden beyond. "Mercy is a fragile thread," he replied, "and I fear it frays faster than steel dulls." For a moment, silence wrapped them both. Aiko's eyes searched his face, seeing not cruelty, but weariness, the fatigue of a man standing between order and collapse. Outside, the crows began to call from the rooftops, their cries scattering across the sky like omens. The mist thickened, swallowing the garden paths, and somewhere deep within the palace, a bell began to toll, slow, deliberate, a reminder that even in the heart of control, time moves without permission. And as the echoes faded, Hirohito felt it, the subtle tremor of a new beginning, or the first breath before something begins to fall apart. Night had folded itself around the palace like an ink-drenched shroud. The lamps in the council chamber burned low, their golden light flickering over scrolls and solemn faces. The air was thick with the scent of wax and cedar, but beneath it, something colder, sharper. Hirohito sat at the head of the long lacquered table, hands resting lightly before him. Around him gathered his most trusted advisors, men of wisdom, age, and unshakable decorum. Yet tonight, as they discussed the empire's trembling edges, trust felt more like a ritual than a truth. Lord Matsuda, his Minister of Affairs, spoke first. "The northern provinces stir with discontent. It would be wise to strengthen the garrisons there, make our presence unmistakable." Across the table, Lord Naganori, the Minister of Agriculture, frowned. "More soldiers mean fewer hands to harvest. If we drain the land of its workers, we will only feed rebellion, not starve it." The argument hung between them, quiet but sharp. Hirohito listened without interruption, his gaze moving from one to the other. They spoke to him, but not for him. Their words, cloaked in reason, were the voices of separate ambitions threading through the same fabric. Lady Aiko watched from the shadows, standing just behind the emperor's chair. She saw how Hirohito's expression did not change, how his stillness had become both armor and weapon. Finally, he raised his head. "You both see truth," he said softly. "And yet truth alone is not enough to rule men." His voice, calm and deliberate, seemed to silence even the candle flames. "If fear commands loyalty, it burns too quickly. But mercy alone breeds decay. We must learn to balance what breaks us." The men bowed, but something in their eyes, an unspoken resistance, remained. After the council dispersed, Hirohito lingered. The room was empty now, save for the sound of rain tapping against the shoji screens. Lady Aiko approached, her steps soundless. "They no longer speak with one heart," she said quietly. "They never did," Hirohito answered. His eyes drifted toward the floor, tracing the faint cracks running through the polished wood. "The empire stands because we pretend those cracks are part of the design." He rose, crossing the room to the window. Outside, the rain shimmered on the rooftops like scattered silver. When a structure weakens, he murmured, it does not collapse all at once. It sighs first. Aiko hesitated, then asked, and what will you do when the sigh becomes a cry? Hirohito turned slightly, his face half in shadow. I will listen, he said. Even to the sound of breaking. The rain deepened. Somewhere in the garden, a single lantern guttered and went dark. And in that extinguished light, something unseen shifted within him, a realization that control was not the same as peace. The palace had grown quieter in recent weeks, too quiet. Even the servants moved differently now, their steps careful, their eyes lowered. The air, once filled with the soft rhythm of daily rituals, carried an undertone of something else, anticipation, or perhaps fear. Hirohito noticed it first in the smallest things. A conversation that stopped too quickly when he entered a room. A letter sealed not with the imperial crest, but with a symbol subtly foreign. And a rumor, whispered from servant to servant, that one of his ministers had begun meeting privately after dusk. It was Lady Aiko who brought the first confirmation. She came to him one evening, her face pale but resolute, holding a folded parchment. It was slipped beneath the garden gate, she said. Hirohito took it carefully, as if it might bruise. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting, elegant, deliberate, was familiar. Matsuda. His most trusted minister. The message was brief. The Emperor's restraint will ruin us all. The time for quiet rule has passed. Hirohito read it twice, then folded it again, his movements unhurried. He said nothing for several minutes. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the soft hum of dripping eaves. Do you believe he wrote this? Aiko asked. Hirohito looked toward the paper lantern glowing in the corner. Its light trembled, alive yet fragile. Belief, he said, is not needed. The shadow tells me enough. That night, he walked the silent corridors of the palace alone. The paper walls breathed with faint drafts, carrying whispers that slipped through like ghosts. He could hear laughter in the distance, distant, cautious, the sound of men who thought themselves unseen. He paused before the audience hall, remembering the morning sunlight that had once gilded its pillars. Now, beneath the moon, it looked different, colder, smaller, a place where truth could no longer stand upright. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear his father's voice, stern and distant. A ruler must not seek love, he must seek silence. For silence is obedience. But this silence was not obedience. It was the quiet that comes before a fall. When Hirohito opened his eyes, he felt the old discipline return, not as peace but as resolve. The kind that no longer asked who was right, only who would remain. In the dim reflection of the window, he saw himself not as emperor, but as a man being watched by his own empire. By dawn, the palace was already awake. The courtyards glimmered with dew, and the faint aroma of incense curled through the morning air like a question with no answer. Hirohito stood on the veranda outside his chambers, watching the mist gather between the cypress trees. He no longer saw serenity there. He saw movement, the kind that hid meaning in stillness. Behind him, the palace stirred, attendants whispering, guards repositioning, officials shuffling scrolls. The empire, to an outsider, looked unchanged. But Hirohito felt it, the delicate fracture running beneath the order. He had not confronted Matsuda. Not yet. Instead, he began to listen. Each morning, he walked through the palace at irregular hours, pausing in unexpected places, near the kitchens, beneath the covered bridge to the inner garden, by the koi pond where servants gathered after dusk. He spoke little, but his presence unsettled. People began to speak softer, to hide their eyes, to weigh every word. And in their hesitations, Hirohito found his answers. He learned that Matsuda's influence stretched further than he had feared, beyond the council, into the guard barracks, even the scribes who recorded imperial decrees. The minister did not move with open defiance, but with quiet persuasion, planting questions like seeds. Was the emperor too young to rule? Too patient? Too soft for the coming age? Hirohito listened, never correcting, never reacting. He let the whispers bloom. Because power, he now understood, was not held, it was mirrored. Whoever the court believed to be in control was in control. Late one evening, he summoned Lady Aiko. The room was dim, the air heavy with sandalwood. They believe they act unseen, he said. She looked at him, searching his face. And you will expose them? He shook his head. Not yet. When the fish circle the bait, you do not pull the line. You wait until they bite. Aiko hesitated. And if they do not? Then we teach them hunger. He turned toward the sliding doors, where the moonlight painted thin lines across the tatami mats. Tomorrow, he murmured, Matsuda will make his next move. And I will let him. Outside, a night bird cried, a sound sharp and lonely against the stillness. Inside, the emperor smiled faintly, though his eyes remained distant. The game had begun, and every breath in the palace was now part of its rhythm. It began with a rumor disguised as routine. A decree, one that Hirohito himself had not signed, circulated through the outer provinces. It bore his seal, his phrasing, even his delicate calligraphy. But the command within it was not his. It ordered troops from the western borders to march north, in anticipation of rebellion. By the time word reached him, soldiers were already moving. The empire's balance had shifted overnight, and the order, false, deliberate, had done what whispers alone could not. It tested his reach. When Hirohito received the report, he sat in silence for nearly an hour. The counselors waited, exchanging glances like men watching a storm form over still water. Lord Matsuda was among them. His expression was a masterpiece of serenity, eyes down, posture humble, every breath a performance of loyalty. Hirohito finally looked up. Who drafted the decree? A low murmur spread. One of the scribes trembled. The seal was delivered to us by Lord Matsuda's courier, Your Majesty. We were told it carried your personal authority. The room froze. All sound, even breathing, seemed to vanish. Matsuda bowed, his voice steady. A misunderstanding, perhaps. In my eagerness to serve. But Hirohito raised his hand. The gesture was slight, yet it cut the air like a blade. There are no misunderstandings in imperial orders. No anger. No shout. Only the kind of calm that made men wish for thunder. He dismissed the court, leaving only Matsuda and Lady Aiko behind. The great hall emptied with the hush of falling ash. For a long time, Hirohito said nothing. He stood by the screen doors, where light from the garden lanterns wavered across his robe. Then, softly, "You have given orders in my name. Tell me, did it feel like power?" Matsuda bowed lower. "Your Majesty, my only intent was to protect the throne." "From whom?" Hirohito's voice barely rose, but each word struck with precision. "From your emperor, or from your fear of him?" Matsuda hesitated. For the first time, Hirohito saw uncertainty flicker behind his eyes. That was all he needed. "You will remain," Hirohito said, turning away, "but not as my advisor. You will serve in the archives. Alone. With silence as your only companion." Matsuda opened his mouth, perhaps to plead, perhaps to protest, but no sound came. The guards entered without a word, and the former minister was led away into the shadows of the corridor. Aiko stepped forward. "You let him live." Hirohito's gaze remained on the garden beyond. "A living man can still be useful," he said. "Dead ones only speak in legend." Outside, the cicadas had begun their song again, a low, endless hum that filled the palace with uneasy calm. And somewhere deep within the stone foundations, beneath the weight of centuries, the empire itself seemed to exhale, as if it, too, understood the quiet cruelty of power. Days passed, but the silence left by Matsuda's removal did not bring peace. It lingered, dense, shapeless, watchful. The courtiers spoke more carefully now, their words wrapped in formality, their eyes lowered in reverence that felt almost theatrical. Yet beneath that stillness, Hirohito sensed something shifting, like water moving under ice. Matsuda's exile to the archives had not erased him, it had multiplied him. His name was whispered in the dark corridors, invoked by those who pitied him, or envied him, or saw in his downfall a mirror of their own fear. He was too close to the truth, some said. He knew too much. At night, Hirohito began to dream of voices, soft, indistinct, overlapping. In them, Matsuda spoke not in accusation, but in curiosity. "You silence me, yet my absence speaks for me. Who now commands, the voice, or the echo?" He would wake before dawn, heart steady but heavy, and find the palace already awake. Guards moved with new vigilance. Servants changed shifts earlier than usual. Everything functioned, yet nothing felt alive. Lady Aiko noticed it too. "They obey," she said one morning as they walked through the misty garden, but not from loyalty. From fear. And fear, once it ripens, tastes of betrayal. Hirohito paused beside the koi pond. The fish moved lazily, their scales glinting like fractured sunlight. "Then let them taste it," he said quietly. "Perhaps it will remind them what loyalty costs." But even as he spoke, doubt stirred within him. The empire had not grown quieter, it had become a labyrinth of whispers. And somewhere inside it, Matsuda still breathed, not as a man, but as an idea. Later that week, Hirohito requested a report from the archives. The attendant hesitated before speaking. Your Majesty. Lord Matsuda has not been seen for 2 days. The words hung between them like incense smoke, twisting, lingering, refusing to vanish. Not seen. Hirohito repeated, his tone unreadable. They say he works through the night, the attendant murmured, and that sometimes he speaks to someone, though no one else is there. Hirohito dismissed the men, but the echo of those words followed him back through the corridors. Not seen. Speaking to someone. That night, he passed by the archives himself. The lamps within flickered faintly, their light distorted through the paper screens. He could hear, barely, a whispering, rhythmic and low, like prayer or confession. He did not enter. He simply stood there, in the dark, listening. The palace walls absorbed the sound until it became indistinguishable from his own thoughts. And for the first time, Hirohito wondered if his empire still belonged to him, or if it had become a living thing, whispering his fate back to him through the mouths of the vanished. That night, the moon was red. It rose low and heavy over the palace, its light filtering through thin clouds like breath through silk. The corridors glowed with a soft, uneven hue, as if the very air had turned to memory. Hirohito did not remember walking to the archives. One moment, he stood in his chambers, the next, he was there, beneath the old paper lanterns that swayed slightly though there was no wind. The door was open. Inside, the scent of ink and damp parchment filled the air. Scrolls lay scattered across the tatami, and the faint sound of scratching, like a quill on paper, came from the far corner. Matsuda, Hirohito said softly. The scratching stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice, low, familiar, unhurried, replied. Your Majesty. Hirohito stepped forward, though he could not see the speaker clearly. The figure sat hunched over the desk, shoulders narrow, head bowed. You were forbidden to send correspondence, Hirohito said. I have sent nothing, the voice answered. Only recorded what is already written. What do you mean? The Empire, Matsuda's voice murmured, writes itself now. Hirohito moved closer. The papers on the table were covered not in words, but in patterns, spirals, broken lines, symbols resembling ancient calligraphy. In the faint lamplight, they seemed to move, to shift like living ink. He reached out to touch one. The paper was cold. Matsuda lifted his head then, and Hirohito saw his face. Or rather, he didn't. The features were indistinct, as if painted in watercolor and left out in the rain. Eyes that shimmered like reflection, a mouth that formed words but left no sound. Do you rule the Empire? The voice asked softly, or does the Empire rule you? The lantern above them flickered. Its flame thinned, bent, and stretched toward Hirohito like a whisper. The walls of the archive seemed to ripple. He took a step back. The desk was empty now. No scrolls. No figure. Only the lantern, still burning with a pale, unnatural light. Hirohito turned and left without looking back. But as he walked the corridor, he could still hear the faint rhythm of a brush gliding across paper, steady, endless, patient. By the time he reached his chambers, dawn was beginning to rise. The servants found him seated by the window, eyes fixed on the horizon, one ink-stained scroll still clutched in his hand. No one knew where he had gotten it. And when unrolled, it was blank. The dawn came gray and soundless. No birds sang. No wind moved. The palace, veiled in mist, looked less like a place of rule and more like a thought that had forgotten its owner. Hirohito had not slept. He sat before the inkstone, its surface smooth and black, reflecting the faintest shimmer of light. Before him lay the same blank scroll, the one from the archives. Each time he unrolled it, he found it changed. Not words exactly, but shapes, as though language were dissolving into meaning too deep to name. He dipped the brush in ink. The motion was instinct, not decision. His hand moved on its own, tracing delicate, deliberate strokes. The lines curved, joined, flowed, until he realized he was not writing about his reign, he was writing it. Every choice, every silence, every death and dawn. The brush seemed to know before he did. Lady Aiko entered quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty, the ministers await you." Hirohito looked up, and for an instant, she faltered. His eyes were calm but distant, like someone seeing through the present, into a place beyond history. "Tell them," he said softly, "the council will not meet today. But the decree from the north is already written," he interrupted, "somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow." Aiko stepped closer, uncertain whether to fear for him or for herself. "You have not left this chamber in days," she said. "The people begin to wonder." He smiled faintly. People always wonder about their gods when the temple grows quiet. Outside, the mist thickened until even the garden vanished. From within it came faint echoes, footsteps, voices, perhaps even the soft sound of distant drums. But the palace guards heard nothing. Hirohito stood. "Do you hear it?" "Hear what, my lord?" "The empire," he said. "It breathes. It writes. It remembers itself." He walked past her, into the corridor where the paper walls quivered in the faint breeze. His shadow stretched long and wavered, as if something else walked beside him. When the servants entered the chamber later, they found the ink still wet on the scroll. This time, it was no longer blank. Lines of calligraphy spiraled across it, intricate and endless. None could read it. The language belonged to no dynasty, no age. Yet those who looked too long swore they could hear a whisper, a single phrase repeating over and over. "The emperor was never born, and so he can never die." And somewhere, far below the palace foundations, beneath centuries of stone and silence, a single lantern flickered back to life. Days became weeks, though time no longer seemed to move in straight lines. The palace remained quiet, doors open, lamps unlit. The air held the feeling of something recently awakened, yet unwilling to speak. No one saw the emperor again. His robes hung where they always had, folded with the same precision he demanded in life. His writing desk was untouched, the inkstone cold. Only the faint scent of camellia lingered in the hallways, as if his presence had dissolved into fragrance. Lady Aiko, now pale and sleepless, took charge of the court. She met with ministers who bowed to the empty throne, each too afraid to ask the question all shared: was the emperor alive? The nation, too, seemed to breathe differently. Fishermen said the sea had grown calm, unnaturally so. In the northern forests, monks claimed the trees whispered prayers at dawn. Soldiers in distant outposts spoke of hearing footsteps in the night, measured, patient, unmistakably imperial. And everywhere, across cities and fields, the people began to tell a story. They said their emperor had stepped beyond flesh, that he had written his name into the world itself. That each sunrise was his brushstroke. Each river his word for mercy. Each silence his unfinished thought. Aiko tried to quell these rumors, but the more she spoke, the more the story spread. Poets recited his verses in hidden gardens. Farmers left bowls of rice at crossroads, for the spirit who governs the dawn. Children played a new game called the Disappearing King. In the archives, one scholar dared to unroll the scroll, the one no one could read. He studied its lines for 3 nights. On the 4th, he was found asleep at his desk, smiling faintly, the brush still in his hand. No one could wake him. The scroll was missing. Years passed. The empire continued to prosper, quietly, almost reverently. Aiko aged but never left the palace. She said once, to the young historian who came to interview her. He was not taken. He became the silence between our words. If you listen long enough, you will hear him breathing. And so the empire lived on, half in history, half in dream. Some said Hirohito had found the place where gods go when they tire of being worshipped. Others said he was still writing, somewhere in the folds of time, making and unmaking the world with each stroke of his invisible brush. No one knew for certain. But sometimes, when the mist thickened over the imperial garden, the guards swore they saw him, walking slowly among the lanterns, hands behind his back, studying the world as though it were still unfinished. Night returned, soft and endless. The palace, once alive with ceremony, now stood in perfect stillness. Moonlight spilled across the tatami, painting silver rivers where no footsteps passed. Lady Aiko had long since stopped waiting. She no longer spoke of the emperor, nor prayed, nor ruled. She simply walked through the quiet corridors each dusk, her fingers brushing the paper doors as though greeting old memories. Sometimes, in the echo of her steps, she thought she heard him, his calm voice, his measured tone, asking once more. If the world dreams of itself, who awakens first, the dream or the dreamer? Outside, the city slept beneath the low hum of crickets. In the harbor, boats rocked like slow heartbeats. The empire had forgotten its fears, its wars, its prayers for glory. What remained was gentler, something like peace. In the archives, dust gathered on scrolls no one dared to open. The scholars spoke less of facts, more of silences. Maybe, they whispered, history was never meant to be read, only felt. And in that unbroken quiet, the story of Hirohito became what all stories one day become, a dream retold, softened by time, carried on the breath of those who listen. No crown. No throne. Only the faint sound of brush on paper. Only the shimmer of dawn beyond the shoji. The empire continued to sleep, and perhaps that was its truest wisdom. To rest, after so much remembrance. to become light enough to float beyond meaning. And somewhere, beyond the veil of memory, beyond the hush of dawn, a voice whispered, tender and eternal, "It is finished." But it was beautiful. And now, as the night drifts deeper and the empire sleeps, we leave our emperor in the quiet of his thoughts, the weight of history softened by the hush of evening. Let the memory of his journey linger like a gentle breeze, and let your own dreams carry you further into calm and wonder. If you enjoyed this journey, and want to wander through more stories of kings, queens, and forgotten moments in history, softly narrated for your sleep, consider subscribing, and let us meet again in the quiet corners of time.